they still function just fine. Also, I'm just now realizing that the strap to carry around them is actually just shoelaces. Hey there, fellow bibliophiles. Welcome to another episode of From the Archives, a short book review podcast where I talk about a book from my library and whether you should or shouldn't read it. I'm Eric, a professor of anthropology at Cuyahoga Community College, and welcome to my library. The books in my library are sometimes old, sometimes rare, sometimes normal, but always interesting. Every week I ask myself the following questions about the book or books that I am reviewing. Who wrote it? What's it about? What are other people saying about it? And should you reread or recycle, shelve it or shove it, can it or keep it, or rather chuck it or cherish it, I should say. I guess can it and keep it is also another option. And then jettison or set it in. I probably could come up with more silly ways of thinking of reasons for you to keep it on your bookshelf or to take it off of your bookshelf. All of the books that I review are books that I own in some way, shape, or form because I have a lot of books in my library, and that's why we're reviewing the books that we're reviewing. And the theme for this season is sort of nature, ecology, environmentalism, that sort of stuff, being outside. What can I say? I was inspired by going outside and seeing all the plants that were blooming, or flowers that were blooming, and how green it is here in Northeast Ohio. So I decided to do a lot of nature-related books. So with all that being said, let's get into this week's book. And I realized for last week's episode, I forgot to do something that starts to feel sort of like an ASMR tradition, but there you go. There's the sound of the book. Let's hear it on the desk here. There you go. It is North American Wildlife, the Reader's Digest, specifically North American Wildlife, with editor Susan Wernert, and this is the 1984 edition, so this was the 6th reprint by that point. My copy used to have a book jacket on it, but my book jacket was getting pretty ratty, and I realized pretty quickly, and we'll get into why, but if you keep the book jacket on, it tells you a lot about how you're using the book, at least in my opinion. So I got rid of the book jacket because the book jacket just kind of got in the way when I would take it outside to try and identify things. So just some fun things to point out for listeners. It's got a green hardbound cover. It's got just a little embossed chipmunk in gold leaf on the front of it, but otherwise nothing really to write home about underneath the book jacket. The book jacket's a little bit more interesting. It's got like pictures on it of wildlife and drawings, but yeah, we're not here to review book jackets. We're here to talk about the book itself. So what is this book about? Well, you can probably guess from the title. It's a book about North American wildlife, so essentially it's broken down into sort of an indexed glossary type organization. They have like color coding on the spine. For those who are listening, not those who are watching, it's color coordination, like we've got pinks, purples, and so on, indicating the different page annotations. So we've got mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibians, insects, trees, shrubs, wildflowers. What else we got in here? Ferns, lichens, mushrooms. And then there was also one that I think mollusks. Yeah. So it's got a lot of pretty pictures in it. So at the very least, you've got lots of good pictures. So I just flipped to a random page here on 92. I've got pictures of ducks, and they're all, at least as far as I can tell, they're all based off of either photographs or hand drawings. So very, very much feels like that John Jay Audubon Society style of like just drawing of plants and animals. But really, I've found this book indispensable over the past, I'd say, 2 months of the summer that I'm into at this point. Basically, after I decided the theme was going to be environmentalism and nature and ecology, and I started reading, Thoreau's Country, and which was last week's episode, and Great Possessions, and all these nature books, it basically inspired me to pull out my old binoculars because I forgot I had a whole set of binoculars. These are my grandfather's. They're all beat up and ratty. Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say ratty, but they still function just fine. But you can tell they're well loved. Got like tape on them indicating, I guess, where he thought the best focal point was. And the paint's chipped away and they're dinged up and whatnot. And basically, this book, in tandem with Walden and Great Possessions in particular, I just feel like I've turned into a birder. Not too much of one because I'm not that interested in reading about bird behavior, but I am interested in at least looking at them just from time to time and making casual observations about what's going on just in my yard. And I really think that this book does a great job of giving you pictures to illustrate what's going on. The one thing I didn't like about this book is it doesn't give you a whole lot to go on. It shows you the geographic extent, so then you can kind of guess what you're looking at. And it gives you one example, especially for wildflowers. It gives you like one example of the plant with the leaf, what the fruit looks like, general descriptions of size. I ended up Googling a few extra things because I just didn't feel confident based on this book alone. Am I going to become the next, field botanist? No. But it definitely gave me a different appreciation for just my own backyard, which up until this point I'd pretty much viewed as like grass lot, and we have some trees, and I'm trying to start a garden, which is frustratingly being destroyed by groundhogs. So now I'm having to lean into groundhog friendly plants. So I guess I'll become an herbalist by the end of this. We'll see where this season takes me. But really, I found the book just informative enough to pique my interest, but not so overly dense in details that you get bogged down in things. It's definitely a reference book. Like this is not a book that you read in the traditional sense. And so that's why in reviewing it, I made sure to give myself like 2 months of time where it would literally just sit on the coffee table, and I would just, I got 5 minutes after work or in the afternoon, I would grab the book and I would just, walk outside and try and figure out what a particular plant or animal was. And so I, in tandem with my binoculars. So really it was sort of like an I Spy. It felt, I don't know, maybe a year into the pandemic, it felt really refreshing to have something that was an activity that wasn't watching YouTube videos or listening to yet another podcast. I know I say that as I'm recording a podcast, but it really did feel refreshing to go out there and try and figure out what the heck is in my backyard. So it sort of made the mundane feel more exotic and adventurous, trying to figure out what the tree is right outside of my front window here. Just I never even thought about the trees in my yard before. I just knew they were trees. I just never thought well, what species of tree are they? And trying to figure that out was actually kind of fun and almost like a puzzle in its own way. I'm pretty sure they're hawthorns, just based on the fruits and the leaves. Not that you guys care what kind of trees are in my yard, but anyway, I definitely enjoy having this book just sitting out, and I will continue to just leave this book out next to my binoculars, so then I can start to just pick it up and go back outside and try and find another plant or animal and figure out what the species is. Now, in terms of animals, not a whole lot going on there, but that's mostly because I live in an urban area, so you're dealing with squirrels, chipmunks, groundhogs, rabbits, a few species of birds. So not a whole lot going on that for me to identify that I couldn't already figure out what they were in advance. Definitely insects is an area that I do not know a whole lot about, entomology. So I'm sure I could start learning more about insects if I really wanted to, and plant species as well. So the biodiversity in my backyard is not exactly amazing for that regard, but it still provides enough of an interest that I'm going to keep this book on a coffee table somewhere with my binoculars ready to go at a moment's notice. And it's also given me a better appreciation for just observations in my own yard in a way that I just, a year of a pandemic and being cooped up inside and stuck on my house, where there would be some days I would just, I could go 4 or 5 days and not have left the property, like not have left my half an acre back in 2020. So, I kind of wish I'd have pulled this book out last year, because then it would have made probably the pandemic a little bit more interesting, or at least, the early stages of it a little bit more interesting and more puzzle-like and gamifying, sort of being outside. Not that I want to say it's gamifying, but all that to say, I thought this book did a really decent job of explaining things and providing pictures. Does that mean you're going to become an expert botanist or field biologist from this book? No, absolutely not. But I think it's a good general reference, and it provides a better working reference than, say, having your phone, because I found when I would use my phone, I didn't even know where to start. Whereas this book provides you with enough information that if I did want to Google something to learn more, I could use this as the jumping off point. So I definitely think that if you're interested in nature and you're interested in at least North American wildlife, obviously if you're not in North America, maybe you don't want to get this one. If there's I don't know if there's other Reader's Digests for other parts of the world, but the North American one, great bookshelf book. The reason I took the book jacket off was because I realized as I would take it outside, I would start to tear it or it would get dirty. And so it was just easier to have the hardcover just as is. There is even like a ruler on the book jacket, like so you could measure things like leaves. I mean, at that point, you should probably just like either invest in a good ruler to take outside if that's really your bag, or just take your camera and on your camera. In this day and age, take your phone out there. If you have a camera, kudos to you. I have a couple of digital cameras, but they hardly ever see any action anymore because the iPhone cameras these days are so good. And I just think it's really handy to take outside, and that's why the book jacket just I immediately got rid of it very quickly after about a week of taking it outside every day, and it would just get dinged up. So that's just something of note as well, is having a book jacket on this book honestly didn't make much sense in my opinion. Because it's a book about wildlife, so you're going to be taking it out in nature, so you kind of want to have it be ready to handle a little bit of rough and tumble, which it's hardcover, so it can handle that. So that's essentially my review of it. To backtrack on who Susan Wernert is, the editor, man, I could not find much on Susan Wernert. She is a editor, presumably at Reader's Digest. I mean, obviously this is 1984, so this is almost 40 years ago. And it was really, this book is edited by her, but if we flip to the front pages here, we have contributing artists, consultants, consulting editor. I mean, really, probably Durwood Allen. Talk about a fun name there, Durwood Allen. Professor of Wildlife Ecology, Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at Purdue. And you've got all sorts of professors involved on this that are listed as contributors. And it just so happens that Susan Wernert is listed when you go to Goodreads or you go anywhere to look for this book. It's just the main editor. So basically someone at Reader's Digest who's doing all the editing. But behind the scenes, there's dozens of other artists and professors and biologists who are providing a lot of the details in this book. So that... all that being said, I'd probably give this book, I really kind of want to give it a 5 out of 5. I don't know. I guess I'll put a caveat on that 5 out of 5 in the sense that you should probably invest in a good wildlife identification book. And whether that's North America, wherever you are. Like if you're in Australia, if there's a Reader's Digest equivalent of Australian wildlife, I would get that, or if it's for your region, whatever it might be, because Australia is pretty dang big. Although I guess North America is also a continent. But anyway, I would definitely recommend 5 out of 5. You should get a carry around glossary, pictured illustrations, color illustrations of wildlife for the region that you live in, so that you can start to explore and learn more about the natural environment that is immediately around you. And it can turn something mundane every day into something slightly exotic and more adventurous. And hopefully that'll make, I don't know, day-to-day things seem more exciting. Maybe make a challenge out of it. Like, today I'm going to try and find a new plant that I didn't know about before, or I'm going to try and count the number of birds. So this is something I picked up actually from David Klein, in Great Possessions, he gave me the idea. I haven't done it yet. I mean, I've done general observations, but I haven't actually started writing them down yet. And that's mostly just because I haven't gotten to that level yet. But he kept a large sheet, and he would keep tallies of the different species of birds, different species of just about everything. So if you saw a new animal come to the farm, you would write it down. I've been generally keeping tabs on how often I see certain birds, not really writing it down. Like I was just telling Kristen the other day, I noticed the last couple of days I haven't really seen a whole lot of birds. And then, wouldn't you know, right before I started recording, I saw 2 cardinals and a couple of robins. Is that, immense biodiversity? No, not by any means. But it was still an observation nonetheless, noting, general patterns of what's going on in the backyard. And it's not like it's taking a large part of my day. It's just something interesting to do and feel productive at the same time. But I don't know. I'm kind of meandering here. I would probably say 5 out of 5, if not for this book, for any book that you can get that's equivalent in your region. But, that's only what I think of it, and that's only what the book's about and the author. Now we're going to talk about what other people are saying about it. So I pulled it up on Goodreads here, perhaps. Yeah. So we've got down here 248 ratings, 28 reviews. It's got a 4.44 out of 5. And let me tell you, the ratings breakdown here, 58% of them are 5-star reviews. There's only one 1-star review. It was actually quite hard finding a written review that was not positive. Since I give it a 5 out of 5, I'm going to be reading you a not glowing review of the book. And this is the only sort of not positive review. It's a 3 out of 5 stars from Megan, November 3rd, 2020. So relatively recent. So case in point, I mean, clearly people are still grabbing this book off the shelves, even though it's from 1984. I think I got this book back in 2011 out in Fresno, California, of all places. Valley Book Center, 838 East Olive, Fresno, California. Shout out to you. That's where I got this book. And I still have the receipt from when I bought it back in 2011. I bought it June 7th, 2011. I paid $15 for this book. And there was an 8.9% tax on it. Wowee. Well, do I think this is a $15 book? I guess at this point I've gotten my money's worth out of it, but I'm not sure I would have spent $15 on it. But anyway, back to our review. So this is from Megan, November 3rd, 2020. I mean, outdated at this point. Several species, populations, and ranges are now inaccurate that I noticed. And the constant reference to, quote, Indians really gives away the date that this book was published. I wouldn't seek this out as a first choice, but the illustrations and descriptions really did keep my attention for what it was. I definitely think it shows that it's from the 80s, but I think if you can find a cheap copy of this, certainly don't pay $15 for it like I did. Don't be a fool. Granted, that was 10 years ago. But if you can find a copy of this for cheap or at the library, it's definitely a fun book to have around and just keep on hand to quickly reference things. And that's something that I've noticed, at least this summer, as I started reviewing some of the books on my bookshelf and really appreciating, I guess, having physical reference. Basically, we have our phones in this day and age that we can Google stuff and search things, but sometimes it's really hard to know and formulate what you want to Google and have good keywords. And sometimes having a book like this allows you to quickly find something based on an image. And essentially, I have a leaf and I have a tree. I don't know anything about it other than it's a tree. It might be a shrub. And then using this book to narrow down your searches. And then once you've narrowed it down to like 3 or 4, which is what I did for the hawthorns in my backyard, I looked at the images from this book, and then I was able to narrow it down to like 2 or 3 species, or 2 or 3, I guess you could say, genus. And then from there, I used internet searches to refine my understanding of it and learn more about the hawthorn tree, which is something obviously this book is not going to provide for you, but it would save me a lot of time in trying to figure out what exactly the tree was. So for that alone, I thought it was very, very helpful. Next week, I'm going to be reading, or rather reviewing, Cultural Resource Laws and Practice by Thomas F. King, 4th edition. I know that's not necessarily the environment and nature, but they do talk about the National Environmental Policy Act, so it technically counts. It's still in my theme in my wheelhouse. And hey, look at that conch shell on the cover, so it's gotta count for something environmental, right? That's it for this week. I will see you next week, and until then, never stop reading.